Introducing Sherrard Crespo and her panel, which is Understanding Trauma, How to Support. Sherrard is a licensed clinical social worker with ViaLink, and you can read the description for this session and her bios on page 11 and 12 of the conference booklet, which as always will be linked in the chat. And from here, Sherrard, I'll let you take over.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with y'all. My name is Sherrard Crespo. I am a white female. I have big curly hair and I'm currently wearing glasses. I am the Director of Outreach and Prevent Child Abuse Louisiana for ViaLink. ViaLink is a local nonprofit in Louisiana, and I will give y'all some information about some of our services at the end of my presentation and how you can utilize them in your continuum of care. But without further ado, let me share my screen before I forget to, so we can get into the presentation. So we are going to be talking about working with trauma today and how you can be supportive of someone who has been through a traumatic event without accidentally overstepping boundaries that could cause some sort of re-traumatization or moving into the realm of being someone's trauma therapist when that is not your role. So to do this, we're going to talk about the brain and the physical changes that actually occur when you have been through a traumatic event and how these manifest into the symptoms of trauma to get a better understanding of actually what's going on, and then give you some tools for how you can support someone and work with someone who has been through a traumatic event. So to get into my presentation, I think it's important that we define trauma. Trauma and traumatic is a word that we use quite often, but what does it actually mean? So to start, as we so often do, we can look into the dictionary. Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines traumatic as an adjective, which means psychologically or emotionally stressful in a way that can lead to serious mental and emotional problems, broadly meaning causing distress or anxiety. So that is not an extremely helpful definition. So let's look into what is trauma really. What separates a traumatic event or experience from just something that we might define as a bad day or a negative event or experience? The difference between something traumatic and something that was maybe just not a great experience for you is that a traumatic event is unable to be understood by the brain's normal schemas. Meaning, if you think of our brain like a filing cabinet, when we have memories that are easy to assimilate and we can recall, like what we had for breakfast or what we did over the weekend, the brain files these away into schemas or filing cabinets. It knows where to put this information. That type of filing system in our brain is called our narrative memory. Narrative memory meaning we can recall the event and tell you what happened like a story. A traumatic event is one that the brain does not know where to file away. And that's how some experiences may be traumatic for some and not for others, because we all have our own past experiences, our own internal resiliency, our own support system. So a traumatic event is very personally defined by, can the brain file this information away? Because a traumatic memory does not get stored in our brain like a typical memory, this is what causes the distress symptoms commonly associated with trauma. Essentially, this memory, this event is bouncing all over in our brain, and that causes these trauma symptoms and traumatic injury to our brain. In fact, studies have shown that when a traumatic event is so severe that it causes dissociation during the event, this type of blackout experience, the amount of electrical charge that our brain utilizes to dissociate like that causes a physical injury to the brain. So when we're talking about traumatic memories, traumatic effects to the brain, you want to think of it just like any other concept of a traumatic physical injury. The brain has to fight to heal itself and to return to normal functioning. The dissociation electrical activity, and then as well as this memory not being able to be stored in our narrative memory, is causing injury. And it takes time and effort to heal itself for the brain to get back to standard settings. It's fighting to assimilate this information, to take this information from what is our implicit memory, meaning that it is more activated by sensory information, to be able to store it into our normal memory function, our narrative memory. And that's what trauma therapy is for at the root of it, is to assist someone in being able to take this traumatic memory and assimilate it into narrative memory. So this type of injury to the brain, this type of change in the way we remember the events will cause changes in the way that we are functioning in our brain, including things like false hindsight. You see this very commonly with someone who has been through a trauma. This type of thinking of, if I hadn't done this, or if I had done this, if I had picked up the phone, if I had left on time, this wouldn't have happened. This type of false hindsight is the brain striving to try and figure out how to make sense of the event so it can store it into the narrative memory. It is very common, and you will most often see individuals hindsight blaming themselves because they can't figure out what else to blame to make this make sense. Again, that is what therapy is for, and it is a very, very common experience. Dissociation and or numbness about the event is very common as well. We call that, that period of shock that you may have heard of. So this is when someone can't quite remember the events. Maybe they had a little bit of a blackout during it. They have trouble remembering it, or they're feeling numb. There's not very much emotional involvement with the event. You see this very much in the beginning of a trauma, the few days or even week or so after the traumatic event, and this does fade away naturally with time. Emotional displays are often quite common with someone who has been through a trauma. This emotional display meaning where out of nowhere they are overwhelmed by an emotion, most commonly anger or sadness. Things like where you might hear someone say, I was at the grocery store and a song came on and I burst into tears in the cereal aisle. I yelled at my mail carrier. I was so angry that the mail was late, and feeling like this is so not them and the emotions were so uncontrollable. This again is because there's activation to the memory stored with our sense memory. So things like feeling out of control or hearing a song or smelling a scent that implicitly reminds the brain of the event will cause this emotional outburst. Blackout is quite common as well. Not being able to remember the traumatic event at all, or even a couple of days after the event. Again, it's the injury in the brain and the brain trying to heal, very common and will typically fade with time. And again, having a trauma therapist to help guide during this process is very beneficial. And emotional activation. Emotional activation is commonly what we call them is triggers. There is a movement within the survivors of violence community, in particular survivors of gun violence, to stop using the term triggered because it is triggering. So I'm doing my best to change my language. So emotional activation is that fight or flight response, that crisis moment when someone is completely overwhelmed. We'll call that emotional activation. And again, this is common because of the brain process and healing that is taking place, that one can easily go into crisis state or fight or flight mode, even though there is no physical danger present. All of these are just the brain trying to make sense of the experience. Nobody is going crazy. These are natural and they will ease with time. And again, even better if it is with the accompaniment of a trauma therapist. So we know what has caused a change in the brain. How are these symptoms going to look? Memory loss, again, is quite common. That blackout that we spoke about of the event, but also having memory loss of present and recent past events. Not really quite being able to remember how you spent your day, not remembering phone numbers that you used to know. Maybe your routine at work, you're having trouble just recalling and doing automatically. Daily activities, more complex memory functions, these are not as easily accessible, again, because the brain is injured and trying to heal itself. This will fade with time. It is completely normal and nothing that anybody needs to be alarmed about, even though it can be quite unnerving. Nightmares are also very common, and these are not our normal type of nightmares that we have. Because this event is bouncing around in our brain, these type of nightmares and intrusive thoughts, as I'll talk about, are like an IMAX screen, big and bold, putting this memory right in front of your brain to where you can't see anything else. It's very dissociating. These type of nightmares can really affect someone all throughout their day. So we want to be very sensitive to somebody talking about their nightmares and how they're affecting them. Again, completely normal. It does not happen to everybody, but it is quite common. Intrusive thoughts also are a very common symptom. We call these a lot of the time flashbacks. Again, where you're just driving down the road or working in your yard, and all of a sudden you get this big, bold memory, like an IMAX again, just showing you the traumatic event or something related to the traumatic event. Again, because this memory is just bouncing around and it's not being stored away, sense memory and other things can activate thoughts, these flashbacks to just intrude into our brain and be front and center. Again, can be very unnerving, but is very common and will fade with time. Panic attacks are also quite common, being very emotionally overwhelmed, having anxiety. I'm sure most people here have heard of that hypervigilance that can occur, where you're very concerned of your friends and loved ones that something negative is going to happen to them. Because the nature of a traumatic event means that we had no preparation for it, that it really took us off guard, it's very common because of the stress hormones going on in our brain to have panic attacks and become emotionally activated, as I spoke of before. Because the information is not stored like a normal memory, the memory function of our brain is affected. And again, these symptoms are normal. They are not universal, but they are quite common and they will lessen with time, especially if you are finding the proper support system. So we may be asking, how can a past event cause these physical reactions in the present? This happened years ago, months ago, yet it is causing physical reactions today. And that is because of the stress hormone that is affecting our brain and altering its functioning. So, as I've said, when the brain is feeling trauma or you have been through a traumatic event, several areas of the brain will shut down in order for the brain to protect itself. Yet the brain is feeling under constant stress. Your hypothalamus will activate your pituitary gland, which activates the adrenal cortex, which releases cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone in our brain. When this stress hormone crosses the blood-brain barrier in our brain, the volume of a part of our brain called the anterior cingulate cortex is going to shrink and electrical activity will diminish. The anterior cingulate cortex of your brain is a part of your brain that filters your reality. It is in charge of activating our fight or flight response. Our fight or flight response is our sympathetic nervous system. It is also called our crisis mode. It is that state of emotional activation. Typically, the anterior cingulate cortex would activate this crisis state, this fight or flight response based upon our sensory information. When we see something dangerous, we run away. If we smell smoke, we get out of the building. Hear an alarm, you run away from it. But because of this diminishing in electrical activity in this part of the brain, it can turn on the fight or flight response when there is no physical danger. When this diminution functioning occurs, you will stop making this fight or flight decision based upon sensory information, and it will activate based upon learned information and past experiences. Now, this is a double-edged sword because if you have been through a traumatic event, which is causing this change in the brain, that traumatic event is the experience that it is going to base this decision on to go into fight or flight mode. So essentially, you are operating in a crisis state and fight or flight mode with no physical activity around you that you can get away from to tell you that you can exit out of fight or flight mode. And that is how this panicking, this emotional activation can occur. So the sympathetic nervous system is activated because of this diminishing functioning in this part of our brain. This will, again, we will be operating as if there is a threat, even though there isn't one. And this also shuts down our higher level of thinking, specifically in our prefrontal cortex. If you think about fight or flight mode, you don't think about anything else when you're trying to get away from or survive a dangerous situation. By design, this is how our sympathetic nervous system was meant to react, to shut down higher level thinking, to save your life physically, and to be used only in spurts when there is that actual threat, to put all of our brain energy into survival. However, when there is not actually something for us to survive physically, it can be very confusing to our brain. And because let's say we're running away from smoke, once we're away from the smoke and we can't smell it anymore, our sensory information will tell our anterior cingulate cortex, we can take off the fight or flight mode. We're good now. We can turn on all electrical activity in the brain. When we're not actually physically getting away from something or fighting our way through something, there's nothing to tell the sympathetic nervous system to deactivate. And when our sympathetic nervous system is activated, we can only focus on the external, remembering that this was supposed to get us away from physical threats. And you cannot focus on internal regulation. So that's how these things like panic attacks or crisis states or emotional activation happen when there's no physical danger, yet you might have an intrusive thought or a flashback, and there's no way to naturally have the brain turn off the sympathetic nervous system and reactivate the parasympathetic nervous system. That's where our job as a support system or a de-escalator can come into place to help someone de-escalate and reactivate the parasympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is what counters our sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is when you have access to your full brain, all levels of thinking. It is what we want activated and in control, because that is when we are feeling safe. That is when we can use our higher level of thinking. That is how someone naturally comes out of the crisis state, is to have the parasympathetic nervous system activated. You are either operating on your sympathetic nervous system or your parasympathetic nervous system. They are not activated at the same time. So the best way to help someone de-escalate if their sympathetic nervous system was activated is to do these tools that we will go through that will activate the parasympathetic nervous system. Activating the parasympathetic nervous system shuts off the sympathetic nervous system. So that is our goal when we are trying to be supportive and validating when someone may become overwhelmed by memories, intrusive thoughts, or emotional activation. So this emotional activation, this occurs when the sympathetic nervous system is activated, as we've said. The brain is sensing a threat, and this causes a sense of panic. The fight or flight response is activated with no physical threat to respond to, and we respond with escalated emotions, typically a lot of fear and anxiety. We want to assist in decompressing an individual to return to a state of parasympathetic nervous system functioning, a return to equilibrium, which means that they will have access to all of their brain function, including knowing their own self-care, their own supports, and their own internal regulation, which is what we want. So when we are responding to emotional activation, if you're having a conversation with someone, if you're having a meeting with them, if it's a client of yours, a student, whatever it may be, and they have been through a trauma and you see them become emotionally escalated, that emotional activation, remember, our goal is that we are just trying to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, shut off that fight or flight response, that sympathetic nervous system. And we can do this in a few ways to assist someone. And the first thing you want to do is to check yourself and your response. We are social creatures. Even the most introverted person who is not social is still a social being. We still feed off of other humans' energy. So it's very important that when you are trying to de-escalate someone, assist someone who is being emotionally activated, that you first make sure that you are calm and that you are breathing regularly. If our heartbeat is up, if our breathing is shallow, other humans will respond to that. So first, give yourself a minute to allow yourself to get your breathing slow, that you are open physically, and that you are giving off calm energy. The second thing you want to remember when you're responding to emotional activation is that you're not going to be able to ask someone to just calm down. Remember, this emotional activation, this sympathetic nervous system is causing a concentration purely on the external and not on the internal. So individuals do not have the ability to actually just calm themselves down like we can do when we are not emotionally activated. So remember that you want to be collaborative. The sympathetic nervous system is a defensive position. Remember, this is the fight or flight response. This means you are sensing a danger. So an individual's dukes are up, so to speak. So they're in a defensive position. So you want to always be collaborative and using collaborative language so that they feel as if you are on the same team. It's very important. Escalation can come a lot easier when someone's sympathetic nervous system is activated. So even just remembering to use we language and only asking something of someone that you yourself will do with them is very, very helpful. We don't want an individual who is escalated to get into a defensive mode or think that they cannot give you the desired response that you are asking for, because that will only escalate your client and raise levels of stress hormones. So let them know there's lots of time. Have your voice be calm and patient and use we language, and whatever tools you're using, use them together. A few things you can do is using someone's first name if you know it and it is appropriate. That communicates a bond with someone. It lets you know that you have an interpersonal relationship. So utilizing someone's first name when you can is very, very helpful. In general, you want to avoid using the term ma'am specifically when situations are escalated. That hard A sound in ma'am is very jarring to our ears, and then that auditory information then to our brain. So avoiding using ma'am and sir is useful. And if you know someone's name, utilize it to communicate that interpersonal connection. The main thing is that you want to get someone breathing. So we all know this. If someone is getting panicked, when they're getting overwhelmed, their breathing will often become quite shallow. And we really need that oxygen to get to the brain. So helping someone to breathe slower is going to be your first response. Again, rather than asking someone to take the desired amount of breaths in and out, do it together. There are lots of schools of thought about how many breaths in and how many breaths out one should utilize. I say go with whatever you're comfortable with, because really we just need oxygen to get into the brain. So tell the person you're responding to that you're going to do this together. You know, if you're saying, okay, Sherrod, I'm going to take 3 breaths in and 3 breaths out. Do this with me when you're ready. I'm going to start now. You come in with me whenever you can, and then starting the breathing. You don't want to be asking someone to do this right now because they may not be able to, and that will escalate them further. So remember, this is a longer game. This is not a short response when you're responding to trauma. If someone is truly panicking and they can't get that breathing long enough, you may try a grounding exercise. I'm sure most people here have heard of, the 5 senses grounding exercise, where you would say, name 5 things you can see in the room with you right now. What are 4 things you can touch? What are 3 things that you can smell? So on and so forth. These grounding exercises are very useful because if we remember what has happened when the sympathetic nervous system is activated, our brain is responding as if there is a physical threat, because the atrophy in the anterior cingulate cortex has stopped the brain from activating fight or flight based upon what is physically around you. So when you utilize a grounding exercise, not only does it just slow someone down and get them breathing, it causes someone to use their higher level of thinking, which is activated only when the parasympathetic nervous system is active. So we're tricking the brain into activating that parasympathetic nervous system. And you are forcing the brain to acknowledge the sensory information, acknowledging by looking at all 5 senses that there is no danger around, which can also signal to the brain to shut off the fight or flight response or the sympathetic nervous system activation. So that is how these breathing exercises and these grounding exercises are very beneficial when you are helping someone to de-escalate from emotional activation. We want to remember whenever we are responding to someone who has been through trauma, that trauma therapy is a specialty. You can have the tools to utilize to support someone who has experienced a trauma or maybe having a trauma reaction, but we want to be sure that we are not broaching into any sort of forced integration of this memory. You want to take the person you are responding to's lead. All help givers can support someone who has experienced a trauma. The basic skill you want to remember when you are not someone's trauma therapist is that you are focusing on the present, the feelings and emotions that someone is feeling today that have been caused by this event in the past. That's kind of your rule of thumb for making sure that you're not dipping into any sort of questioning that may cause someone to be re-traumatized. So allow your client, your friend, the person you're responding to, whomever that may be, to express themselves and tell their story as much as they're comfortable with you, but keep your questions and your responses focused on the present to avoid emotionally activating someone. You do not want to ask any questions about the event. You don't know what they may be prepared to dig into or not. So your questions, your responses are focusing on how that person you're responding to is feeling today. Because essentially these trauma reactions are happening because of the emotions they are experiencing today. So just keep that in mind. Your focus is on today. How is someone feeling today? The therapist who specializes in trauma will work with your client or whomever it is that you're supporting to address the past. But by supporting the present, you can help to cope through these reactions that are being caused by the traumatic experience. And that is our goal, to support someone through today, to help someone feel supported and validated through the emotions that they are experiencing as a result of this trauma. So what can you do? There are a bunch of steps that you can utilize to support someone. One being to accept the effects of the traumatic event in memory and to normalize these trauma effects, to not act as if somebody is going crazy, to utilize this information that we've been through today to let someone know this is common. You've been through a traumatic event. I promise you, you're not going crazy. And with the right supports, all of these effects will lessen with time. You want to reassure the person you are, supporting, letting them know that you're here, you are listening, you are validating their emotions, and then to refer someone to some sort of support system, trauma therapy, support group, whatever that may be, when that is appropriate, given your role in this person's life. So with accepting the effects of trauma, it's important for us to get out of our comfort zone. We have quite the tendency to feel as if we need to, quote unquote, make someone feel better. We don't need someone to feel better right away when they are experiencing their emotions from trauma. You do not heal if you do not feel. So it is important for us to utilize empathy and get down in the hole with someone rather than trying to pull them up out of the hole in those moments. You need to be with someone and letting them know that it is okay to accept the enormity, not only of what has happened to them, but how this is manifesting in the symptoms they are now currently having. There's a big difference in having a hope for the future versus feeling better right now. It is very important that someone has hope for the future, hope that if they're putting in the work and getting the right support, that all of these effects will lessen, but nobody needs to feel better right now. It is appropriate for someone to have these feelings of panic, of fear, of anger when they have been through a trauma. And again, you cannot heal if you do not feel. Part of accepting the effects is that person who has been through the traumatic event, accepting kind of a grief process that they may not go back to the person that they were before. And this does not necessarily have to be a bad thing. I have had clients tell me, I like the person I am better now. I just hate how I got here. But there is a process in forging a new identity and grieving that you your life trajectory has now changed. The way you understood the world has now changed. And it is important for someone to truly accept, like I said, the enormity of what has happened to them and what this means for them as they go through this trauma process. You want to do your best to normalize using the facts that you know, letting someone know that the symptoms that they are experiencing are natural effects from trauma and that they will not feel this way forever. I work personally with survivors of suicide loss, which is a traumatic form of grief. And the one thing I do tell my clients is, I promise you will not feel this way forever. If you keep putting in the work, if you keep utilizing your supports, it will take time, but you will not feel this way forever. The emotional and mental trauma is just like any other form of traumatic injury. It takes time to heal, and the healing process can be painful, but it is important to feel the pain, to feel the emotions, to talk about your experiences as you're having them, because that is the way that you will get stronger through this trauma process, and you will not feel the way you are feeling right now forever. You want to do your best to assure your clients that they're not, quote unquote, going crazy. This is quite often a fear that people have when they have been through a traumatic event and they are having these symptoms of memory loss and emotional activation and feeling out of control, is that they think that they are going crazy. And many people handle trauma in different ways. So it's very important to reassure those that you are supporting that what they are experiencing is common and it is normal and it will not last forever. And that there's no right or wrong way to feel. Even individuals who have been through the same traumatic experience may experience the effects of this trauma differently. Individuals have varying support systems, past experiences, genetic makeup. You can go through the same experience with another person, and your levels of traumatic response will differ, and your process will differ. That doesn't mean one person is better or stronger or what have you. It just means all of our brains are designed differently. The focus is on learning and understanding the reactions to trauma to cope adaptively, helping someone to feel like they are not going crazy, helping someone maybe map out and understand what activates them. Is it certain songs, certain smells, certain people? Because that's going to lessen these trauma reactions when someone is not being taken off guard by these emotional activations. And as time goes on, an individual will learn more about what activates them and be able to mentally prepare or cope even better, understand when their brain is having a trauma reaction, knowing what it is, labeling it for what it is, and riding the wave through it. You want to do your best to validate, displaying empathy and positive regard. These are your biggest tools, really, in any form when you are supporting someone. And you want to remember that you can validate the way someone feels about a traumatic event without having to validate someone's opinions or behaviors. You may find in your professional experience that you are supporting someone or have a client who maybe you don't agree with their opinions or maybe the decisions they have made, but you can always validate someone's emotions, and that is very important. Remembering that you can just use your tools of paraphrasing, saying, I can hear that you went through this experience today and that you are feeling angry, or I can hear that you are feeling sad. By doing that, I have let my client know that I have heard what they've said. I have not said one way or the other what my opinion is on that action, but I have validated the emotion they are experiencing because of this action, behavior, opinion, whatever it may be. Keeping the focus on emotions and feelings will validate them. This is also de-escalating, which is healing, and it gets your client talking, utilizing their narrative memory, their narrative skills, their parasympathetic nervous system, which is what you want. Validation brings about honest talk and time and patience, and these are the keys to healing. Remembering, you cannot heal if you do not feel. So tools for validation, your basic tools that you would utilize would be the tools of nonviolent communication and active listening. By utilizing these skills, we validate our client's experience and assist them in becoming consciously aware of their feelings. By demonstrating positive regard, your client is going to trust you and your observations. So this will lead to an understanding of the emotions that are being felt, which can lead to positive coping. We cannot change the events that someone has been through, but we can help someone to cope through the resulting emotions. And remembering that a focus on emotions keeps you focused in the present day, which is what you want. We don't want to be the ones to dig into the past. Your client may tell you whatever they want, their whole story. Do not shut them off. But you want to keep your focus as the responder on the present, on the emotions. That not only displays empathy, it also assists in de-escalation and again, also reduces the risk of re-traumatization. So nonviolent communication, this is a form of responding where we are observing without evaluating. It's a skill in processing with someone because you are always on their side. This is how we can demonstrate positive regard and that we believe someone's story exactly as they are telling it to us, which is innately de-escalating. We are not drawing our own conclusions. We are on the path with their client as they develop their own understanding. It's very narrative focused. As human beings, often, especially if we know someone socially, when we hear a story they tell us, we are subconsciously, in the way we are responding, adding in our own evaluations or advice because we are basing that off of our own experiences. When we're working with a client or just supporting someone has been through a trauma, we need to focus on their experience and reactions. That is why we would use nonviolent communication. It's utilizing the skills of paraphrasing and positive regard to let your client know, I am on your side and I believe your story of the events. Again, the trauma therapist would be able to help someone work through maybe the actual timeline, the logic of the events, etc. We are being supportive, we are validating emotions, and we are helping someone to stay de-escalated and get to a point of being able to cope through the emotions they are feeling. When we accidentally combine an evaluation, our own opinion of the events, with an observation, the person you are responding to is more likely to hear criticism and judgment and will likely resist what you are saying, or it can also be escalating since they may be in that defensive position, which is not what we want. The process of nonviolent communication discourages static generalizations, such as saying, oh, that must have been terrifying for you, and instead encourages making evaluations based on a specific observation. So essentially what that means is that active listening, as I'll get into, is that evaluation piece where we add in the emotion word for someone. You first separately must always put in your observation of, I hear that you went through this traumatic event and it sounds like right now you're feeling scared. That is the difference. That evaluation, it sounds like you're feeling scared of that emotion word is separate from the observation, which is the paraphrase of what someone has told you. And it's very important when responding to someone who is escalated or someone who has been through a trauma that you keep your observation separate from the evaluation, which in this case, when we are being a support system, is going to be adding in that feeling word for someone. Active listening. Active listening is built upon this nonviolent communication. And that is when we are listening to the music behind the words. So we're taking the observation from nonviolent communication and adding in feeling words. Now, it might sound strange about why identifying a feeling word is supportive or de-escalating, but essentially this form of communication naturally has a lot of validation in it, and it causes higher level of thinking to activate that parasympathetic nervous system. It also helps someone to identify how they can cope through the emotions we are feeling. When you are able to identify the emotion you are feeling, you are able to consciously put in coping mechanisms to accept this feeling and to cope through it, which is what we want. Remembering we must feel in order to heal. So essentially, as an active listener, when the brain isn't automatically being able to tell an individual their feeling words because it's overwhelmed, we are inserting that process in for them, helping them to acknowledge the feeling word they are having at that moment and then cope through it and feel validated by it. This causes a great interpersonal connection. It is a de-escalating and it is validating. So your basic tools are paraphrase and summary, as we talked about with nonviolent communication, and then a feeling reflection statement. You can utilize this using this basic feeling reflection formula, which is I hear whatever event has happened to them. That might be the traumatic event, or it might be something that happened today that caused emotional activation, losing their car keys. I hear that you lost your car keys today and it made you late for work, and it sounds like you're feeling anxious. So I have paraphrased exactly what someone told me, which was losing the car keys. Separately from that, I'm adding in my evaluation, and it sounds like you're feeling anxious. We are activating the parasympathetic nervous system. We are validating, we are displaying empathy and positive regard. These active listening, these feeling reflection statements are checking all the boxes we're looking for in supporting someone when they are feeling activated by their trauma. So remembering, I have heard this happen to you, comma, and it sounds like you're feeling whatever feeling word. Even if you're wrong about the feeling word that you put in, let's say you say anxious and the person you are responding to says, no, I don't think I'm feeling anxious. I think I'm feeling angry. They're still going to feel heard because you've put this observation in. And if they're having to think through, well, if it's not the emotion they said, what emotion am I actually feeling? That is utilizing a higher level of thinking in the brain, which keeps the parasympathetic nervous system activated, which is what we want. We're also keeping our focus on the present. And by utilizing these statements, we're not relying on questions, which may make the person you are supporting feel pressured or judged. So you want to use as many encouraging, validating, or active listening statements as you can when you're supporting someone who's been through a trauma. And referring when it's applicable. Utilizing referrals to help someone with the trauma piece that they may need after being through a trauma. Trauma experts, trauma psychologists, trauma therapists, counselors, social workers, whatever it may be, someone who specializes in trauma. And then also support groups can be a great tool. Someone being able to be a part of a support group for individuals who are survivors of this same type of trauma. There have been lots of studies that have shown support groups can be one of the most beneficial therapeutic tools for trauma because you are sharing your experiences in a place where you feel comfortable because people have gone through the same thing and they do actually understand. There can be nothing more frustrating when you are a survivor of trauma and someone says to you, I understand, because in your mind, you're thinking, no, you don't. There is no way you understand this. Or maybe individuals may feel uncomfortable opening up. They don't want to scare anyone. They don't want to make anyone nervous, or they just fear someone's not going to be able to truly understand. So by being a part of a support group or a community of individuals who do truly understand, it can be very beneficial in the healing process and accepting the effects of the trauma. There's a lot of validation, a lot of normalization. And then eventually there's this wonderful process where someone who is a member of a support group transitions from the one being supported into actually utilizing their experience to support others. And this happens very naturally, and it's very empowering and really can help someone to see how far they have come in their journey of healing from the trauma they've been through. There can be lots of long-term effects of unprocessed trauma. I always say it like this, that emotions are like matter. They cannot be destroyed. These emotions are naturally occurring and automatic. We do not choose how we get to feel about something. We do not choose what emotions occur, and all emotions are good. We are supposed to feel all of them. So if someone tries to repress their emotions, they're not going away. They're just buried and they're going to surface eventually. And this surfacing will be much more explosive than if someone had been processing their emotions along the way as they are healing from their trauma. Because someone has not learned in quote unquote real time how to cope adaptively through the emotions, and they are surfacing more explosively, most likely then maladaptive coping would be utilized. That would be things like not getting proper sleep, not exercising, substance use is quite common, self-harm, or even things that might make someone more capable of suicide. So it's very important that we support someone into feeling the emotions they are having, not having someone bury them down. I just want to touch one quick minute on ACEs, which would be the Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale. In a nutshell, with this ACEs study, they've seen that the more adverse experiences a child goes through, the more effects you will see represented long-term in someone's behavior, long-term or short-term, sort of depending on the age of the child. But the most important frame that you want to think about when looking at children is that we're turning away from when a child may be misbehaving to asking, like, why are you acting this way? But instead thinking of, what have you been through? Because these traumas that a child may have been through can manifest through things like what might look like misbehavior, what might look like rebellion, looking at it as if someone is acting out, but instead it is a child trying, or even an adult in some situations, trying to figure out how to cope with these repressed emotions because of the trauma they have been through. If you work with children, I very much encourage you to go through an ACEs training. It is very enlightening and really can help to show how unprocessed trauma, even from years before, may be manifesting in current behavior. I also want to touch briefly on suicide risk as it is associated with trauma. Remembering that anyone and everyone can be at risk for developing thoughts of suicide, and it is nothing to be ashamed of. It is just the way that someone's brain works. Historically, you see that suicide rates have gone up in times of illness or financial crisis, and we have been experiencing both at escalated rates since the COVID-19 pandemic and the traumas that have been produced from that. Remember, suicide ideation is a brain issue, but the majority of people will develop to some degree, ideation being those thoughts of suicide. But for someone with suicide ideation, someone who does have thoughts of suicide, emotional activation or that sympathetic nervous system activation can increase the chances of what is called a suicide crisis state, which means that someone is in that window where they may attempt suicide should they have the capability for a suicide attempt. Not understanding or having long-term hope for the effects of trauma can cause an increase in the feelings of isolation, helplessness, and hopelessness, which are correlated to increased suicide risk. Lack of sleep due to trauma can also increase suicide risk or increase the degree of ideation someone may be experiencing. So essentially thinking of it that this constant stress can exacerbate or flare up this brain health issue, sometimes for the first time for an individual. So remember, suicide ideation, thoughts of suicide is a health issue that stress is a correlation to, but not causal, and it is nothing to be ashamed of. So if you are supporting someone who has been through a traumatic event and they do share with you that they've had thoughts of suicide, that is also something that it's very important for us to normalize and to validate and to let them express how they are feeling, to get the gunk out. It's very important. And then if you are not someone who feels comfortable addressing suicide directly, being sure that this person is being followed up with a professional or the suicide helpline or anything like that. You definitely need to follow up, but to do your best to at first just let someone know, I'm so thankful that you're sharing this with me. We want to be careful about this cultural concept of moving on. I think of it as kind of the Netflix concept, where on normally a young adult show, they will have, a very special episode where someone goes through something traumatic, maybe even they attempt suicide, and everyone rallies around them. And then they're kind of like, phew, glad that's over, and they never speak of it again. And that is not how we want to be. The long-term effects of trauma, it's a lifelong game. It will not always be as intense as it is in the beginning, but this will have always affected you. This is not how healing really happens, to just try and move on and act like this event didn't occur. You are supposed to feel emotions and reactions to life events. That is how our brain works. That's what keeps us functioning adaptively, is that we have a stressor. Our brain identifies an emotion being caused by this stressor, and then we cope adaptively through that emotion. That's how that active listening works. We're putting in that identification of the emotion step when the brain is overwhelmed, so that someone can choose to adaptively cope through the feelings they are experiencing. When we give the message to someone to get over it or to pull themselves up by the bootstraps, we're actually cutting off someone's permission to feel, and that cuts off their ability to actually heal. If you're not coping through the emotions, you're repressing them, and then they will explode. We want to help someone to know it is okay that you are still feeling affected by what you've been through. It's normal, and I'm here for you, and you are still very strong. There is, however, an importance of hope. There's a very big difference between hope in the long term and get over it and move on. And it's crucial that people that have been through a trauma have hope for the long term. Not an immediate buck up and get over it, but hope that with the work, with the time, with the support, that the feelings they are experiencing will not be as acute as they currently are, that they will not always feel so overwhelmed, that the trauma will not be interfering as much throughout the day, that these effects will lessen with time and they will continue to grow stronger. There's an importance in having an acceptance of where someone is now, and that is okay, but a promise that they will not feel this way forever. And that by allowing themselves to feel broken, to feel right now, they are actually healing themselves for the future. And it takes a lot of strength and a lot of bravery. A few things that you want to be conscious of to avoid if you are supporting someone through a trauma, de-escalating someone, or if someone is just opening up to you. One of the bigger ones being trying to add a silver lining. We often do this culturally that we want to say, well, at least if we are responding to someone who has opened up to us about a negative experience they've been through. So just remember to take the words at least out of your vocabulary. Um, it is okay for someone to just feel negative about a negative experience that happened to them, to feel fear, regret, anger, sadness. It's okay. By silver lining, we are essentially telling someone, I don't want to hear how you're actually feeling. It's too tough. When we really want to be that support and safe place where someone can open up completely about what they're going through. You also want to be very careful about asking someone to be thankful for their trauma. This is a common response we see a lot as well, just as a culture as we are. Again, because sometimes we feel uncomfortable with the amount of feeling and pain someone has. So we feel like we want to make them feel better. So sometimes we say something like, well, it made you so much stronger. That is not the way we want to phrase that. That's asking someone to be thankful that this traumatic event happened to them. And we never want to ask someone to be thankful for their trauma. They are a strong person and they are getting stronger. They have been through this event and they are strong. Not that they have to be thankful and that this event is what made them strong. So be careful. These little tweaks in our language are very important. Stressful relationships, feeling under that constant stress is already happening due to the trauma. So stressful relationships, unsupportive relationships are definitely something to be evaluated. And sometimes support systems do change after a traumatic event. You also want to be careful of media and social media consumption, as they can actually really increase the cortisol, the stress hormones in our brain. It's very interesting, in studies they've done, we live in an age now with less of a chance of an immediate threat or danger to our bodies than ever before in human history, but we have much higher rates of fear and anxiety. And many studies believe this is caused by this 24-hour news cycle we now live in. So though we live with less physical immediate threats than our ancestors did, we are constantly exposed to trauma, to violence, danger, and death and conflict through the media. The information age is powerful, but there sometimes can be a negative side to it. So due to this repeated viewing, we can be traumatizing ourselves or releasing that stress hormone by witnessing the traumatic situations at exponential rates across the globe, which of course our ancestors did not have access to. This can be even more increased through social media because there are conflicting stories and false information. And there is that constant exposure to trauma, but then also then the people fighting and having conflict over the trauma in the comments, etc. So you want to just be looking at media and social media like any form of coping. Is it adaptive or maladaptive? And it can go on a spectrum. For some, the media, social media helps them feel connected to the world, and that might be an adaptive coping mechanism for them. If you are finding with your client, with someone you're supporting, that media and social media are causing them to stress, it's something we want to look at. Do we need to alter what pops up on your news feed? Maybe limit the amount of hours that you watch the news a day. So just paying attention to what someone is telling you and helping them to address it appropriately. want to just have a caution to the essential worker, to the help giver, that working with someone and supporting someone who has been through a trauma can cause vicarious trauma, very similar to what we were talking about with the media exposure. So it's important to have your own debriefing, your own place where you can talk about the feelings you've had through hearing other people's stories. It's very important to have a process of how you leave work at work, have that proper work-life balance. Essentially, you need tools that allow your brain to shut off and stop thinking about work. For some, that might be, email blackout hours where you do not have to respond to work emails during these times. Even little things like changing your clothes after work sends a signal to your brain that it's transitioning into another time of the day. Putting on gym clothes, changing into your comfy clothes, having an activity that you do directly after work, whether that's maybe a quick meditation or listening to a podcast, cooking dinner, going for a walk, any of these physical things, they actually signal to our brain to shift in its focus. And that's very, very important in avoiding burnout. Debrief, being able to talk about what you've experienced, and supporting each other in your workplace, in your community group, wherever it may be, that you're always there to have a compassionate listening ear, and that we're also being observant. If we notice someone is struggling, to talk to them about it and help them get connected to the proper supports without judgment and without repercussions. Understanding, validation, time, and hope are what we're looking at. The acceptance of the present bad, but hope for the future. And that there's not a need to quote unquote get better. Someone is functioning in response to the trauma the way they should. Having trauma reactions because you've been through a trauma, experiencing all the feelings. This is healthy, this is bravery, and we want to accept that and support that in others. The memories and the reactions of this trauma will get softer as you feel and you heal. And now I wanted to give y'all a few resources that we do offer at VLink that can be beneficial for you as someone who may work with trauma survivors or support someone who's been through trauma, and also to use as referral systems for people who need a little bit extra help. So at VLink, we do run a contact center that answers phone, chat, and text lines that are available 24/7. One of those lines is 988. 988 is the new 3-digit dialing code, or you can also text 988 for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. 988 is available 24 hours a day. It is answered by 2 nonprofits in Louisiana, including VLink, and you are routed to a Louisiana 988 center based upon the area code you are dialing from. So if you have an out-of-state area code, you will get routed out of state, but you can request to be routed back to a Louisiana center, which I recommend. That is available 24 hours a day. You do not have to be having active thoughts of suicide to utilize 988. We will always ask, but you can tell us no, and we will move on and focus on what you called to talk about. But you can absolutely express your thoughts of suicide on this line as well, anywhere from passing, thoughts of I don't want to be alive anymore to I may attempt suicide today. We are there for anything and everything. Or if you are concerned about a loved one, you can call us and we can support you. We can answer whatever questions we may be able to. Nothing's too big or too small to give us a call. For teens, we also have a statewide available crisis teen text line that can be reached by texting 833-TEXT-TEEN. Oh, and all of these phone, chat, and text lines are listed on our website and our social media, which I will give you at the end of the presentation. The crisis teen text line is always answered live by one of our trained specialists. And again, we're there for anything and everything that the teen or adolescent may be going through. We also have a statewide available line just for parents, Louisiana Parent Line. This is an emotional support line as well as a resource referral line for parents that can be reached by dialing 833-LA-CHILD or by texting 225-424-1533. We also have crisis chat available through our website. So that's kind of like the old school instant messenger chat. Available through vlink.org. Again, all of these are answered live by a trained specialist through us at VLink. We also do offer support groups. We have a support group for teens who are living with thoughts of suicide to whatever degree. It meets, now it meets on Tuesdays from 6 to 7:30. It is free to join. It is virtual. There are no attendance requirements. For more information, you can email realtalk@vialink.org. Again, all of this information is also on our website, vialink.org. We also have a weekly Survivors of Suicide Loss support group. This is a virtual group available statewide to any adult anywhere in Louisiana who has lost a loved one to suicide. We meet every Thursday from 6:30 to 8 p.m. The group is free to join. There are no attendance requirements. And to join or get more information about our suicide loss support group, you can email sos@vialink.org. Again, all of this information is on our website, and I will also give y'all my email address, and I am always available for any questions. We do have outreach and education available, training opportunities on topics such as crisis intervention or de-escalation, suicide education and response, ACEs trainings, and we also do perform Darkness to Light Stewards of Children training, which is child sexual abuse prevention training. We are happy to be at any event or to share our resources. We have wristbands with the crisis lines on them. We have cards that will fit in your wallet. We have bigger pamphlets. We have pins. We are happy to give you any of these sort of distribution materials that we have for you to put out at your agency. We will get them to you for free. Please feel free to email me directly, screspo@vialink.org, if you would like a list of what we have to offer, or if you would like to request us to send you anything. We are happy to do so. And just contact us for any questions. Let us know how we can best support you in the work that you're doing. This is my contact information, Sherrard Crespo. I can be reached at 504-708-2937, or you can email me at screspo@vialink.org. Again, please visit our website. Our website also is home to our data dashboards, where we have been able to utilize non-confidential data that we receive through our phone chat and text lines to create data dashboards, which are showing information like where are calls coming from, what are the needs we are seeing, and what are unmet needs. And we call this our data for good because we are displaying this data for free on our website that individuals can utilize to drive programmatic change, to see in real time what is happening in their communities. And you can also follow us on Facebook. We're at facebook.com/vialink211. I just want to thank y'all so much for having me here today. I am available for any questions, and please do not hesitate to reach out to me.
Thank you so much for attending today, Sherrod. We do have a couple questions that I wanted to bring to your attention. Again, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A section. One of them is from Lillian Dejan. She asks, when someone experiences trauma, does it make the brain more susceptible to experiences future events that are traumatic, i.e., is the brain more sensitive to new trauma after the first traumatic event?
That can be dependent upon the individual and what the next trauma is. Some people might have more built-in resiliency for certain traumas based upon their past experience. So, and depending on where they are in their trauma journey, if they have kind of an understanding of their trauma process and a similar trauma occurs, they may actually be more resilient. If it's something where maybe the first trauma was pretty recent, or maybe they have not been able to process through it, that injury isn't healing, so to speak, that would make someone more susceptible to being traumatized by a similar event.
Okay.
Sort of compound trauma, as it were.
Sure. And we do have another question. This is from an anonymous attendee. How do you support an individual spiraling from trauma response when they refuse to get help from a trauma or specialist or therapist?
That can be really hard when you care about somebody and you feel as if they're not doing everything that they can to support themselves. It's kind of individual, and unfortunately we can't, force people into being ready to address their trauma. even in trauma therapy, oftentimes the therapist is going to kind of follow their client's timeline and not force them into sharing something that they're not ready to. The best I can say is that to continue to support their emotions they're feeling and continuing to remind someone, I'm so glad I can be here to support you, but I can't do everything. And I think that you would really benefit from trauma therapy and offering, to go with them, help them find the therapist. Are they feeling overwhelmed maybe by the looking for the therapist, by the financial aspect, whatever that may be, and just supporting them through that journey. But I do completely understand it can be quite frustrating when someone could benefit from extra support and they're not at that place to be ready for it. All we can do is what we can do, and that's to continue to support, acknowledge verbally that this is trauma response, kind of keep implanting in the brain like you're not being weak, or you've not just gone through a negative experience, you are having trauma responses, which we'll continue to associate with a trauma specialty would be best in addressing this, but sometimes it just takes time.
And I believe Jim Mitchell asked if we can put the dashboard URL in the Q&A. I believe we'll do that after the in just a minute after the presentation concludes. We have about 10 minutes left if anyone has any additional questions. Feeling that I do want to mention that our next, I think we have another one. Okay, so this is again from another anonymous attendee. You discourage silver linings when you're working with trauma survivors. Would you include forgiveness in that category?
That's a good question. I would follow the lead of the person you're supporting. If they are struggling with forgiveness, being understanding with them of that, sometimes it takes even forgiving yourself, whatever that may be. But let's say they're a survivor of someone who maybe they lost a loved one due to homicide or something like that. Forgiveness can be quite a long process. I think when you hear that kind of forgiveness coming in as someone is telling you what they're experiencing that day or part of their story, encouraging that there is strength in forgiveness. I personally would not correlate forgiveness with silver lining. And I do think that there's a lot of healing in forgiveness. I wouldn't try and force forgiveness on somebody because they just may not be ready for it. But I do think it's a powerful thing that you can support and encourage whenever someone on their journey starts to get to that place of wanting to feel forgiveness and letting them know that it takes time, but they're being very strong.
Perfect. Well, again, Sherrard, thank you so much for being here today. Our final presentation of the day will begin at 3 p.m. You are welcome to stay on live and just jump right into the next presentation. Again, I think this topic is something that isn't often discussed. So we thank you for being here and thank you for sharing your experiences. I think it's a lot. We got a lot out of it, and I appreciate you being here and your time.
Thank y'all so much.